So with all of that, I will pass it off to our amazing facilitators. Please take it away.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Oh my gosh, I'm like giddy looking at my people I haven't seen in forever and ever. Good afternoon, everyone. I am obviously reading from a script because I'm a production person and can't memorize lines. My name is David Stewart, known as dstew in the industry, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm calling from the stolen land of the Seminole people, also known as Orlando, Florida. That's where I am the production manager for Disney Live Entertainment. A visual description for those who may not be able to see me. I am a light-skinned black man who is bald. Everybody teases me about that. That's okay. I have a full beard that is getting grayer by the day. I have two pierced ears, eyeglasses, and wearing a dark blue button-up shirt. Over my left shoulder is an image that is hard to see. It is of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston. I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your day to come in and lean into this conversation around production leaders of color. We have an amazing panel of individuals with tremendous amount of experience, both professional and lived, and I couldn't be more honored to share this virtual space with them. If you have any questions, we ask that you put them into the chat so that we can monitor which questions we would like to answer, and we reserve the right to not answer any questions that are put into the chat. With that, let's dive in. I'm going to move this over to my other screen. So a little bit of housekeeping on my end. If you see me looking up and to my right, it's me looking at the questions. So let's start with introductions. And Hillary, you're on my first up list.
Hey y'all, I'm Hillary Luong. I'm cool with both she, her, and they, them pronouns. I am the production manager at New York Theater Workshop, zooming in from the unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape. Visual description. I am standing in front of the red brick wall of the workshop and with like frames and a bulletin board behind me. I am a Chinese woman with pandemic long black hair, thin wireframe glasses, and a blue and white striped collared shirt. I think that's everything.
Thank you. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, Hillary. Mr. Bennett.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are zooming from. My name is Lawrence Larry Bennett. My pronouns are he, him. I am currently the director of production at the Repertoire Theater of St. Louis, which is located on the ancestral lands of the Illini, Osage, and Missouri people. I am also the vice commissioner for the ED9 for the Management Commission for USITT. For those joining us auditorily, I'm going to roll with it. I am a 6'1", heavier set, darker caramel complected black man. I am wearing dark brown round eyeglasses with a short-haired mustache and beard. I am wearing a Black Lives Matters t-shirt, and in my background is my kitchen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Larry. Itzel.
Hi everyone, I am Itzel Ayala. I use she, her pronouns. I am an assistant production manager at the Public Theater in New York City. The public sits on the land of the Munsee Lenape people, and I am zooming in from the land of the Canarsie Munsee Lenape people, otherwise known as Brooklyn. I am also my visual description is I am a light-skinned Mexican American woman. I am wearing wireframe glasses as well as a black shirt, and over my shoulder sits AOC, who I love.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for those introductions. And again, thank you all for joining us on this conversation, a very important conversation, as we talk about BIPOC leadership in the realm of production. Many years ago, when I first went to my first production managers forum, which is PMF, in early 2000s, there were 2 people of color that were leading theaters in terms of people of color. And now there's a whopping 42. So that's out of over 700 theaters. So we are still definitely in the minority, and we wanted to engage in this conversation about how we lead and what leaders can do to support us. So it's so great to see other theater leaders here in this space. With that, we're going to jump into our questions for our panelists. So we are hearing the term anti-racist quite a bit these days. What does that term anti-racist mean to you all?
Larry, you want to go?
I'm happy to jump in. For a long time, there was this mantra held amongst the United States majority of white people where just being non-racist was enough, right? They would see acts happening around them and go, well, that's not me, I'm not racist. And so we're having this conversation now of what it means to be actively anti-racist. And to me, when I put the difference is to be non-racist is passive, and to be anti-racist is an action, it's a verb. It's something that you do every day, every step of your life in your personal, professional careers. And so, how I define, anti-racism is the things that I bring to the table in my personal, professional life. Am I actively not oppressing people who want to be in my sphere, whether that's personal or professionally, and making sure that I'm doing the work to be welcoming and remove the gatekeeping that might be between me and that person. So for me, that definition really is an action. Like, what am I actively doing? In my calendar, every day at 9:30, it pops up that says, what are you doing today to be anti-racist? And it's just a reminder to make sure that all of my actions that day are fulfilling that mantra.
Nice. I think I'll add that as production people, we are professional people who spend money. And in that way, our lives and our work intersect with anti-racism really innately. And we're going to probably dive into this later, but as part of being anti-racist in production, we necessarily have to talk about being anti-capitalist as well. And so trying to figure out how our values and the work that we do align, I think is going to be really central to this conversation we have today.
When I've been thinking about, the terms of anti-racist is, well, one, there's like the thing that I'm thinking about for like myself, like for me as I walk through the world and as I like interact in like my personal life, and then as well, like what does it mean to be anti-racist in the theater industry and then in the production world? Sometimes I like try to break it down and I'm like, okay, what is like the essence of it for myself? And I find myself thinking so much about like, oh, am I being thoughtful? Am I being mindful? Am I putting some time and care into this hiring that I'm doing, into this like hiring process that I'm contributing to like ensure that there's like, equitable practice at play, that like we are able to like bring in new people. And so that is sort of where I kind of focus on sometimes when I think about what it means to me, because I feel like a lot of times it's just like, are we being human people with other human people?
Yeah, anti-racism as like not anti something, but like pro people and pro humanity.
Truly, truly, truly. Yeah, getting in and doing that work, as everyone has stated so far, it's just not enough to, like on Facebook, when a movement happens so quickly, we see people go up and put the little banner around there. Facebook has done a great job on capitalizing on oppression and pain. And people all of a sudden are like, hey, let's black out my picture. And then 2 days later, it's back to kittens and food again. So what are you doing every day to just continue to do that work and remain engaged in it? And so many people think of it as a sprint. And it's like, oh, diversity, done. I hired a Black person. I'm good. And without diving in and actually engaging in policy and procedural changes, things that are going to fundamentally shift how we hire, how we spend our money, and how we engage. And I think that sometimes we get lost in words and stuff, and then we start focusing on the wrong thing and not focusing on the things that, like, not that words don't matter, but it's like, how do we get into things that are going to change lives for the betterment of folks? Those are really great. Thank you all for sharing that. Moving right along to question number 2, I'd like to talk about what various theaters are doing to operationalize, to steal a word from Disney, operationalize their commitments to anti-racism work. What policies and procedures are they putting into place to back the pretty words that many of them have put on their websites? And a little bit more about that is just like, So we see, especially when we see White American Theater came out and listed demands, um, theaters were a little bit slow to respond. It was like one came out, and then two came out, and then 7 months later we have an accountability report listing over 100 theaters and what they are going to do. And I know I personally kind of went through those theaters and looked at it, and I was like, oh look, they wrote pretty words and haven't talked anything about the details about what they are going to do and the actual operationalizing and metrics that they're going to put into place to measure the work that they're going to do. So I went through and I'm like, they're going to do it. They're going to do it. We're all adults in the room, so I'm getting ready to swear. They're full of shit. They're full of shit. They're full of shit. So I'm very curious as to what you all think about this topic.
Yeah, I'm happy to I'm happy to jump in. We, in the world of full disclosure, my organization has not put out a a statement on the Black Lives or the We See You demands, and that's because where we are in our organization is before the beginning line, as I like to say. The Repertory Theater St. Louis, up until 2018, but really 19, was largely an institution that was homogenous, meaning everyone who worked there was all white. That is not hyperbole, that is a fact. They had one person of color who was in our costume shop who still works here, but it wasn't until they hired Hannah Sharif, who was the first Black woman to be an artistic director of the North Theater, that she diversified the leadership team. And so when she came on board, she brought with her what is now 40% BIPOC people on our leadership team and staff, right? So they went from essentially zero, we went from essentially zero to 40%. And what that means is, as we've been on this journey, post event of 2020, we've had to establish what harm and trauma the big rep has caused into the communities that we serve and we're in alignment with, or want to be in alignment with, and also the harm and trauma that the harm and trauma we've caused with people inside of our organization. And so we had to start the beginning of our journey with, what does it look like and mean to be anti-racist? What do those words mean? What does inclusion mean? What does diversity mean? Are we going to fire all the white people and then bring in all people of color? Like, how are we doing this, and what does that look like? So our journey really began with educating the entire staff on how we tend to move forward to be on this anti-racism social justice track. The last, what it will now have been 12 months of our time, has really been spent trying to gain our muscle of what this work means and what this work looks like. And it has been difficult. There has been a lot of vulnerability. There has been a lot of trauma in that room. There has been a lot of tears shed and white fragility and upsetness and everything that happens when you're trying to do this work. But we're really trying to focus on getting us to a point where our words, to Stewart's point, aren't just pretty words on our website. Like, when we put something out, we want to make sure that we stand fully behind them and we are able to then move into that next section. And so the things we've done to date is that we started reading several books. We read this book is Anti-Racist. We read How to Be an Anti-Racist. We looked at blogs and videos. We went through board training, our board. With an arts equity board training, right? So we're doing all the things to get people to a place to really do the work, right? Like right now, we're now at the starting line for everyone to have the same kind of language and understanding around what this looks like. And now we're ready to jump off the diving board and say, okay, how do we start to put this in place with our policies and practices? So that's where we are in that journey. And it's been difficult because we want to be loud and proud to say, hey, we are doing the work and we're doing this thing, we're out here trying to make it happen. But our journey just looks different from another theater who might be further on that road because we were still really building that muscle.
Yeah, truly, truly. Larry works at the Repertory Theater of St. Louis, which 31 years ago gave me my equity card. And so that's how long this journey has been for the rep. And those people were there. That leadership team was there when I was coming out of school and going into that organization. So yeah, it's been a long journey for that organization. Hillary or Itzel?
Yeah. Oh. Okay. I'll go.
Go ahead. Go.
Sorry, Hillary. So something that to me, this question is a little tied to, like, who are the people who are, keeping the institutions and like the big people at the institutions accountable to the pretty words we put out, on social media and or our websites or across, because I definitely agree with when dstew says like pretty words. I'm like, I go and read sort of like back to like what the public put out in terms of like the responses to VC or the responses to like work on anti-racism, like very pretty words. Like, I'm reminded that like sometimes, it's me who goes back to remind, my boss, my boss's boss, right? Of like, we said that, and like, what are like, we need to do something up. Like we said it, we need to do something about it. And so something I'll share of what something I've been doing, like me personally, is I've been sort of helping kind of reimagine the hiring process for stage managers, specifically at the public. We received a lot of feedback for a while that it wasn't good. This was before my time. And so then, July 2020, August 2020 happened. And it's like, we said all these things way back. What happened? The answer was nothing happened. So like nothing changed. And so I saw myself in a moment of like, okay, well, I guess this is like maybe the hill I'll die on of like, hey, we have to do something about it. So like me and alongside some of my other colleagues who have been like leaning in support of this, I like won't let it die. And I'm like, what we are clearly here needing to put policies and processes in place to ensure that like we are, one, supporting our stage managers, and two, also like what is the pathway of a stage manager at the public theater? And it's a lot of work. It's like, it requires a lot of time, but like it's also very fulfilling to like know that like I'm giving a piece of myself, like I'm putting a piece into that. The other part of that coin, I think, as well, is like the reminder that it's like always me who has to bring it up, right? Or like I'm like, one, I'm an assistant level, so I'm like, okay, I'm the one bringing this up. And the other thing is like, where are my other white people also trying to bring this up all the time,
Yeah.
Just a quick second. No, sorry about that. I actually want to put a pin in that one, Itzel, and come back to it maybe a later time about that insane amount of pressure that gets put on BIPOC individuals that are in these organizations, and especially in production, because we have to remember that the one thing that we have not talked about here is that there are very, very few production people of color, period, full stop. So when we are leading large swaths of white individuals, and then so we're in this spot, our teams are all white, our leadership is all white, and then here we are always having to be the reminder, and the emotional and physical toll and scars that leaves on us and what that does. And I want to come back later. We're going to talk about self-care and all that, but that's something I want to also prop up and keep in mind when we're having these conversations. Sorry, Hillary, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, lots to respond to. Yes, and to everything that's been said so far. I think that what's doubly difficult about being in production and seeing these statements is that it is one thing to hold the institution accountable, but what I'm sure a lot of us have experienced is that the administration is typically separated from production. That a lot of the time, and especially for New York Theater Workshop, we're not a regional theater. The vast majority of the production staff are not full-time staff. They are hourly crew folks who are brought on for the production, or brought on for 8 hours in the day. And so by and large, they're not included when the entire staff is brought to a 3-hour anti-racism training or white supremacy training or upstander training. And so what are the networks that we need to form? What are the, processes that we need to put in place to make sure that these folks who are not full-time staff, but contribute hours and time into our institution, make sure that they also have to access the same resources that staff does? How do we make sure that those folks are also have the ability to attend a 3-hour anti-racism training and are getting paid for those 3 hours? They're not volunteering that time to gain that access or better themselves. It is part of their employment at our theaters that they have access to these things, and that they are brought up to speed in the same way that us and our administrative staffs are. I think that the other thing I was going to say has totally lost my mind. Disregard. But yes, I mean, don't forget about production when you're scheduling trainings for your administration. And also, don't let your production managers tell you that they don't have time for this. Because I think that that's the other thing, is that if you have a production manager who, I think it's pretty common in production for us to tell you that we're too busy and that we're too overwhelmed and that we work on a different schedule than y'all do in administration. But work with us. Try and find that time. Make time in our schedules to make sure that our staff is brought with you on the journey to being an anti-racist organization, because we can't do it without you, and you guys wouldn't be addressing the entire community without us.
So true. And that timing thing is so incredibly difficult and equally important. Jennifer Bielstein, who's on this call as well, was an amazing partner with me at the Guthrie when I was the director of production at the Guthrie. And I remember going and sitting in our, oh, thank you for turning your camera on. So many times we would go to her office and we'd sit around that round table, and I'd have to glue her chairs back together, but that's a different story. And we would talk about how are we going to get the entirety of our Guthrie community together, because it's almost like, I'm going to use really problematic language here for a moment, but they would call us day walkers and night walkers, and those who work during the day and those who work during the night. And how could we run this confluence of community? And it was really, really difficult to find that time, because people at 5 o'clock were ready to go home and people at 5 o'clock were getting ready to run a show. So oftentimes Jennifer and I found ourselves in dual spaces where we would hold two of the same meeting, and we'd look at each other and go, did we already say this already? And trying to have these conversations. But it's so important to have that partnership. And again, Jennifer was a great partner in that. Joe Hodge was an amazing partner in that. And we were a great team in those things. And when we came in and trying to do these policy changes, it was like jumping on a bucking bronco, trying to hold on for your dear life, trying to institute policy changes. And Joe had great ideas. Like one of them, our policy changes that we came into, was that we would have no homogenous creative teams. So when we were building our creative teams, we had to have that creative team being directors, designers, choreographers, etc., had to be racially and gender diverse. So that was always Joe's conversation, leading in with the director saying, hey, this team has to be diverse. The other policy that we had in place was around our hiring, and that was that the pool had to be a diverse and qualified, underline both things, diverse and qualified pool of candidates. And why I say underline under both things is because oftentimes when you say, well, we want to bring in diverse candidates, and the thing that we oftentimes hear back is like, well, if they're talented. Well, we don't talk about that when we're talking about white candidates. When we talk about BIPOC candidates, it's always like, well, if they're talented, of course we would do this. Like we don't have talent, which makes me crazy. So what was funny is that Jennifer and I discovered is that people started discovering loopholes through that policy. And at one point in time, leadership had to say, no, the finalists have to be diverse and qualified, because people were like, the 300 people applied were diverse and qualified, but our final 4 were a homogeneous grouping. The one thing that I did when I got in is, because when I looked at the job description for the director of production, it said you had to have a master's degree. Sorry, my Disney things are all beeping at me. I had to have a master's degree. You had to work in a multi-venue space that had a budget of $10 million or more. And I call that shit hidden nepotism. So you don't say you want John, Fred, and Bob to apply for this. You give a list of narrowly constricting ideals that eliminate so many other people from being able to apply. So I never applied for that job. And I got a phone call from someone at the Guthrie who says, we want you to apply for this job. And it's like, okay. And then so when I got there, one of the things we did was I shifted for production the job description. And that was to eliminate any educational requirements for that. So no longer was it you need to have an MFA, because I would challenge people and say, why an MFA? It's like, well, I need them to have critical thought. I need them to be able to write well. I need them to have good communication skills, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, great, write that shit down. You don't have to have MFA in order to have those things. I don't have an MFA. I think I have those skill sets, but I don't have an MFA. Just because you have an MFA doesn't mean you have those skill sets. And just because you have your skill sets doesn't mean you have an MFA. So we need to work really hard on job descriptions. The other one was pay transparency. We also put into place, it's like we have this pay range to be able to do that. So those were some of the things that we put in place when we're talking about policy changes. But again, like I said in the beginning, it was like riding that bucking bronco. And I told this to Jennifer many, many, many times. It's like, it always felt like we had people that were like, why are we not going faster? Why are we not? I know, Jennifer, we have to catch up. Why are we not going faster? Why are we not going faster? And we have so many other people that are like holding on white knuckle and go, what does equity mean again? I don't understand. I thought that was a union. So, it's trying to figure out how to do that. But at the same token, there's, Joe always used to say, we have to move at the pace of the slowest buffalo, but we can't do that if the buffalo has 3 broken legs and is 95 years old. We have to, at some point, keep the organization forward, lest it die. So at some point, we have to keep moving forward. All right, Hillary.
Oh, I was just going to add that I love what you said about like diversity and qualified, that but I think that also requires all of us to re-examine what a qualified candidate is. It's exactly what you were saying, that like, instead of asking for an MFA, let us list out the qualities that we're looking for, and then also question them again through the lens of white supremacy, right? Like, if we are valuing timeliness and perfectionism and worship of the written word, how are these things like demonstrating themselves? What is the word I'm looking for?
No,
like,
you're absolutely
coming
right.
out in the way that we are reviewing resumes or interviewing folks. And we have to really start questioning at every level what we think qualified means. And maybe it's because of our narrow definition of qualified that we end up with a really narrow pool that seems to be a pipeline that we can't escape.
Well, I would say the thing that really narrows that field of vision is that we actually don't train our leaders of today, right? So I'll say this in terms of production. How often do we go in like a scene shop and we need, that unicorn that we're all looking for, a technical director, right? And we go in and we're looking for a technical director, and we go to our welder who's like this badass welder, and it's like, you're a badass welder and you're really nice to me. So do you want to be the technical director? Just because we go into one of those pillars of white supremacy called urgency, and therefore we have to do things quickly. So now we promote that welder to become the technical director, and we give the technical director zero training. And all of a sudden, once they don the title of technical director, they now have to become HR experts. They now have to have cultural competency. They now have to be able to participate in long-term strategic planning. And all of a sudden you put those things on them and we wonder why they fail, and we wonder why their network is so narrow. We've set our leaders up to fail. We need to discover some form of gap training that allows people to do that. When I came to the Guthrie and Joe Hodge put me in those rooms with the donors and everything, and I'm like, these people can smell the pour on me. How am I supposed to talk to folks? What am I supposed to do here? How do I converse with these folks? And I had to work with Jennifer and work with Joe about how to do those things. They had to train me up in how to do these things. And that's not a great place to be in. So I think we have to do a lot more in terms of training up our future leaders, especially in production, because there's always, there's that stair step for artistic director. You're an actor, then you're an assistant director, and then you're a director, and then you're an associate artistic director, and then you're artistic director. So you're learning on the journey. We don't have that. We simply don't have that in production. All of a sudden, it's like one day you're a stage manager, the next day you're a production manager. Huh? Where does the training come in? Okay. I got quiet like there's somebody else hosting this. All right. So
yeah, hold on. I just want to jump in quickly to say, to really sort of amen Hillary's point. because a lot of conversations I've been having lately with folks, and we're talking about this idea of how do we tap this network of diverse workers to work in our theaters. They just simply don't exist. And to your point, Stewart, instead of saying MFA, list the things. And what I often tell folks is, using the scene shop for example, let's just keep with this theme. If you're looking at someone who knows how to build scenery, right? You're like, well, there's no one who knows how to build the actual scenery. But if I look right out my window right here, I see 6 people out here doing construction, right? Who know way more about building than anybody probably in the scene shop. But if you go up to that person, you say, hey, can you build me a platform? Hey, can you build me a theatrical flat? And they'll look at you like you're crazy. But if you look at that person and say, hey, I need a subfloor. Hey, I need a temporary wall. Hey, I need a low-bearing structure. They're like, oh, no problem. I got that. I can teach you the language of the thing because I know you have the skills. And so when we're talking about this idea of narrowing the field, we to Hillary's point was so well taken. We have to really start to look at how our field of view and scope is creeping into the job description. So if we're really looking at the brass tacks of the thing, what are we looking for? I'm looking for someone who has build experience. I'm looking for someone who knows their way around a scene shop. I'm looking for someone who knows how to read a tape measure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? When we start to look at that, then your field goes from this to this. Because now I know that you have the skills. And to Stewart's point, if you have an organization that is invested in gap training, I can teach you platform. I can teach you flat. I can teach you turntable, right? Because you already know the skills and the mechanism of the thing that you do out in the real world. We're just applying them differently. And so oftentimes when I'm having other conversations with organizations, it's let's look at how you are addressing the thing, and then let's change that. Because I bet you it has coded language in it that's keeping your field narrow that you might not be aware of. So I just wanted to off that for you.
I'm going to drop one little bit new thing, and I actually did this to Disney when we were talking through this about hiring processes. We actually, the hiring process, the interview process, actually kind of sets people up to fail. What I've proposed to Disney is that 15 minutes prior to a person going into the interview, that they are given the majority of the interview questions. So they can take 15 minutes to sit down, collect their thoughts, and come into the room and be their best selves. Now, I, as the hirer, will hold on to a few because I need to see how you think on your feet. But why do I set that person up for better success in the space when they have 15, 20 minutes to interview? So let's figure those things out. Let's figure those other things out to help bring out the best in people. All right.
This is so true, dstew. And not to add into like kind of take us further into the journey of like once we hire folks, right? I think once folks are hired, there's also something where I see most places fail. Supporting of these people once they're here, right? Because like what we then see as well is like certain positions in which we are constantly replacing folks because folks came in, into like middle management or something. There was no place for growth, or, they got stuck because like only all of the BIPOC candidates ended up in middle management. And then like, so then these folks are like, well, I guess, well, there's very few choices, right? Stay here and like put up with all of this, or leave and get, either better pay, a better position, and all of these things. And like, as much as I kind of also can understand that like certain places or certain jobs aren't meant to be like perhaps your job for the rest of time, like some places do such a quick turnaround of people of like 2 years that is, disheartening. When there's so many candidates, so many wonderful people who could like be there for a little longer and who would contribute beautifully, to those places, just don't have the opportunity to do that because they're not supported.
Absolutely. Anything else on this one before we move on, my friends? Awesome. So our third one is I'd like to for us to discuss what you're excited about at your institution, policy-wise, and what they wish their organization would do. I'll jump off first. Here at Disney, I'm going to shift from the non-for-profit to the profit world. We've kind of had a reckoning over the past year here at Disney, and it was slowly coming into place. I remember being in spaces where we're like, oh, we can't say, David, when you're talking, don't say white supremacy, don't talk about anti-racism. Don't say those words. Shh, that's really taboo. And then George Floyd was murdered, and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter happened, and our leadership kind of stood up and took notice, and we're like, oh, we have to do better. So we have 4 keys at Disney, and they're courtesy, show, efficiency, and safety. And those were put into place by Walt himself many, 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 many years ago. And those are just like considered sacred, and you don't mess with them. Well, we messed with them, and we built a 5th key called inclusion. And that one is first among equals now. So in that, an example of operationalizing the inclusion policy is something we call the Lookbook at Disney. So if I were a front-facing cast member, my beard had to be a certain length. I couldn't wear fingernail polish because I'm a man, or identify as a man. I couldn't wear earrings. I couldn't have any visible tattoos, and I had to wear certain clothing. Our lookbook was gender and racially divided. And with that, we have completely revamped our lookbook. So we've removed any references to gender and all references to race. So I can wear my hair super long if I had any hair. I could, as a male identifying person, I could wear fingernail polish as long as it was all singular color. As a matter of fact, the day after I did it, after the policy changed, my daughter painted my fingernails, and I rolled with black fingernail polish for a couple days in celebration of that. But we've done that, and what that does is allow people to express themselves fully at the Walt Disney Company. My tattoos can be visible with certain parameters. I can wear my earrings. My beard, as long as it's neat, can be any length. And I've seen these come up in a lot of TikToks where you see people of different identities now seeing themselves in our cast members at Disney. And it's just so amazing to see that. Uh-oh, don't have me pick on y'all.
Let me just say that I'm Sherry Young, African American Shakespeare Company in San Francisco. That what I just heard you say, David, is remarkable, because when I was in high school many, many years ago, I had a business course about Disney, and that is a tight machine. So for them to allow you guys to do that is, wow, groundbreaking. But that's all I wanted to say. I came in late. I'm not sure what the subjects are right now. I'm just trying to mellow in. So I'll let someone else take the floor.
No, appreciate it. So the 4 of us are production leaders of color, talking about what it's like to lead in our various organizations. But thank you for saying that. And you're right, it's really, really tight knit. And I'm super thrilled because now I can wear my kilts in the park. So that being said, Hillary, you were going to say?
Yeah, Larry, did you want to go first? No? The original question was things we're excited about at our organization, right? And so I think that what's really awesome about New York Theater Workshop is that we've kind of been endeavoring down this road of being an anti-racist organization for the past couple of years. And it kind of got kicked into a public-facing journey with the release of the We See You White American Theater demands last summer. And so we've been working through those, and there are some really obvious ones that were already part of our working practice that we're going to continue focusing on and highlighting. And then there are some that are things that we internally have been trying to figure out how to implement for years, that We See You White American Theater has really given us the kick to put into place. And the top example of that is eliminating 10 out of 12 technical rehearsals. It is detrimental in so many ways to not only like our lives, but also the creative process. And so it's been something that a lot of people have been talking about for years. And I'm really glad that we made the decision to go ahead and eliminate those, definitely for next season, probably forever. But what I thought was really great and really helpful in our process, in your theater workshops process of deciding to do that, is that eliminating 10 out of 12s affects a lot of folks in our community. It affects directors, designers, stage managers, actors, our run crew. And so instead of making that decision within leadership or within producing and production alone, we actually scheduled a series of roundtables where we invited folks from our community and we presented them with the idea that we were going to eliminate 10 out of 12s and then heard their feedback. And so it was a cross-disciplinary, cross-medium collection of folks who have worked with the workshop before. And so we had a sound designer and a stage manager and an actor and a director in conversation with folks from our artistic team, production, and producing to basically say, to bring them into these kind of developmental conversations that we've been having internally, which I thought was really great because these folks who we depend on to make our art, it brings them into our community and tells them that they are we value their work and we value their voices, and that they should feel like they have ownership over New York Theater Workshop as an institution and as an identity. And it also gave everyone an opportunity to bring to the table what their priorities were, what their concerns were as we headed back. Eliminating 10 out of 12 is a great idea, but what does it do? What are the repercussions of that? Does it mean that some overhired crew will lose some overtime pay if the hours are shortened? Does it mean that directors are going to be more likely to lean on folks who they've worked with before that they already have a shorthand with? Does it mean that they're going to stop looking at new folks because they have less time to do things? The answer to both those questions is no, and we need to make sure that it doesn't. But all that to say that I learned a lot listening to those folks bring their ideas to the table, and I really hope that they took a lot of value from being part of those conversations.
Super dope, super dope. You know, for me at my organization, you know, earlier I spoke about us really being at the beginning of this journey, but what I've seen here in the last 3 to 4 months is what used to be a really heavy burden on the education of this anti-racism, anti-oppression work on the BIPOC leadership is starting to get caught on by our white colleagues, right? They're starting to identify policies. They're starting to identify things that we've done to say, oh, I have a question about this. Is this? And we go, yes, and let's talk about why that is, you know, good, bad, or the otherwise, right? And so what started off as a real, I don't want to say burden, but I'm going to use the word burden, you know, we're in the beginning of this journey, has really started to ease as folks have really bought in and started to understand the complexities and the nuances and starting to be on this journey together. That's not to say that everyone's at the same place. That's not to say that everything is with it and get it, but it is to say that what once was, you know, a 400-pound lift is now like a 200-pound lift, you know, as we're starting to get people to kind of shoulder this burden. So that has been what's really excited me as we're now starting to begin this process of really looking at our policies in everyone's individual department, really looking at what's, you know, has been our modus operandi and how do we start to change that and adapt that and make policies that are more ARAO work so that we are being as equitable as possible. You know, the thing that I wish we would do, I think was the second part of that question, is really look at our schedule, right? I think the next hurdle for my organization, I'll speak from the eye, but I assume for a lot of folks, right, is that we still build our schedule to the nines, you know, where, you know, production folks and oftentimes some artistic folks don't get to lead lives outside of the organization, right? If you celebrate Christmas, we're often in Christmas week. You celebrate Thanksgiving, we're often in Thanksgiving week. You know, if you know, are celebrating, you know, your Jewish holidays or your Muslim holidays, right? We're always in the theater working. And what I would love to do is be able to sit down and have a conversation around a calendar that says, what happens if we take out these religious holidays? What happens if we black out these days on the calendar? What happens when we start to look at the days where folks can actually have time and space to breathe and to be people, and then put our performance and production schedule on top of that and see where we land? That to me is the place where I really want to get to, and not just assume that between the hour or the months of August and May that we're putting in a show whenever there's daylight. or moonlight, depending on the time of day, right? Happening. So that's really where I would like to see the next step go.
I think for me, so thinking about the excited part, so some things are now less controversial to name that I think, even like a year ago to a year and a half ago, like I was like, oh, I wouldn't say that. Because I remember like before, last year, after the murder of George Floyd, and like around the time I accepted the job at the public, I remember telling myself, I was like, you're getting this job. Don't think about the EDI stuff. Like they're gonna probably you're gonna feel betrayed about it in like 3 years. Like don't think about don't just go in, do the job, and like go out. And like the problem for me personally with that idea that I gave myself was that like that's not who I am. And so I, as a passionate person about this, like constantly, like I devoted my entire undergraduate thesis to like the idea of like equity in theater and accessibility to like other communities. Like that wasn't gonna work, but I definitely told myself that. I was like, it's a non-for-profit, they're gonna something's gonna happen. And so I didn't contribute to that conversation for months and months, until I was like, I clearly have to contribute. I have to say the things that are on my mind now. And that was like a moment I noticed that was like hard. But I think now past that, in 2021, I feel like we have a little bit now more of a common language when I'm speaking, to my boss's boss, like, my supervisors, and like the folks who make up production at the public are also like primarily dominantly white. So then in some ways I feel like, okay, now there's like some common language. We're at a very base level, but I think some things are less controversial for me to name now. Like, and so that there's like things to look, I feel like, for in the future, in the next couple of years, that like, I'm like, oh, this could be, this is going somewhere perhaps. And so that makes me excited, but I guess at the same time, because I know that like, I kind of can't name something for like in the next 6 months, in the next year, that like, I'm like, okay, because I feel like I could contribute in the same kind of ways that like Larry just contributed, right? Like the hurdle is like the calendar already, right? Like we feel hurried, we feel rushed to do a thing, which is leading down to like doing probably like repeating practices that we were hoping not to, like do again. Which is just, hard to like think about.
You like reminded me just now of another definition of like anti-racism, which is to like whole person thinking, accounting for the entire person, not just for their job that they do at your institution, when evaluating kind of the structures around what they do, and like accounting for the whole person while not exploiting that person. I think it's like a fine line that we're also witnessing ourselves mesh. But yeah, yes, and to the scarcity that that we currently live in, given the pandemic, and the fact that like scarcity often leads to really like detrimental behavior and does not allow for the really important and progressive work that we've all spent the past year planning for. And so like, how do we find that culture of abundance amongst this like actual scarcity landscape?
Yeah, I've often come to wonder whether there needs to be like a moment, right, like leading up to production, or like once we like feel more closer to the production, of like, how do you center yourself back? Like not as like, yes, as an individual into this work again, but perhaps like as a company together. That's a question I've been having that I don't have an answer for.
Hillary, it's like you're a plant and just feeding me the next line I was going to give. Thank you so much for that. And I think that is my big fear is one of a general fear for the industry, as like you were talking about, is like everybody's like, we want to do these things, we're planning these things, we're going to be more progressive in that. And my fear is that and I've had this since the start of the pandemic, is that the American theater is going to go back into its trailing orientation, right? It was my biggest fear before Black Lives Matter had its resurgence. And it's my fear again. And my fear is that theaters will say, we have to find our financial footing. And in order for us to find our financial footing, we have to roll out the Eurocentric canon. And in order to do the Eurocentric canon, because we have to do the Eurocentric canon because we think only older white women buy theater tickets, therefore we have to put our work geared towards them. And so in order to put that canon on stage, we have to be risk averse. So then we have to bring in the homogenous creative teams in order to do our homogenous shows. And we are right back where we started again. So I am deathly afraid that we're just going to slide right back to where we were, if not further behind, because so many BIPOC, especially production people, have up and left the business. So I am really, really concerned that we're going to slide back into that trailing orientation as a whole and operate from that place of scarcity, right? So many of those things that we used to do in the past of, you're lucky to work for this organization, come do this, or that, oh, guess what? President Biden said this, therefore we're going to open up our theaters tomorrow. Therefore we have to put up a show. And I know we know how to do the show. So let's just continue to do it the way we've always done it without using the mindfulness that we've talked about. But then again, talk is cheap. Let's see what happens when the rubber meets the road. All right, moving into our next question. As we all tend to lead predominantly white production teams, what does leadership support look like to you all? I saw all.
That's such a loaded question. I mean,
yeah, that's why I asked it.
Lord Jesus. I think support can look like a lot of things. I guess so for me, Larry, right here, right now. I think that support does look like gap training and ongoing training, right? So I come from the technical direction background. That is what I got my degrees in. That's what I was learned to, and made the switch to production management without any real giddy up, right? I sort of just jumped in on both feet and as we tend to do in these jobs, learned on the job. So I think, one of the ways to support is really having, a lot of people talk about this idea of onboarding, right? But onboarding is only a month, 2 if you're lucky, right? But if we're really able to stretch out that process over that person's first year even, I think allowing them space and grace to have a safety net, for lack of a better word, to grow into the job. What I would love to envision, right, is that we're hiring people because that person, how they show up holistically and authentically, is the person we want in this organization, right? What you bring to the table is beyond the skills of you as a PM or a TD or designer or whatever, but you as you exist and your ideas are good for our culture and how we want to propel ourselves forward to be the type of organization that's doing the work for the people, by the people, of the people, right? And that there is grace given on the other end of it to allow you to grow into the professional that organization needs. So that way it's complementing both halves of that. So, for me, what that support would look like is being able to bring my ideas and my, my whole self to the table, and then also help get support in the areas where I might not be as proficient as you need me to be at that given time over the stretch of like the first year of a new job, for example. So I would say that, Stewart has been yelling at me for what feels like years about seeing a therapist. Yeah, about seeing a therapist, right? And not just in times of trauma, but just to be able to talk to someone who has a baseline, so that way when trauma comes around, or I'm in crisis mode, that person understands me a little bit more authentically. And so I would offer that for the room is, if you don't have someone that you're talking to, either professionally or otherwise, having that support system is huge. I talk to Stewart all the time. Stewart's one of my triumvirate of support that I call whenever I'm in crisis or have questions about career choices or so have you. And he is, from all intents and purposes, my therapist. who comes and guides me and takes me through whatever those different conversations are, right? But there are 3 people who are sort of on that committee that I go to who have difference of opinions and ideas, right? But they really support me because they know who I am and are able to give me their opinions, and I'm able then to find my way through that problem. So I would say if you don't have a support system, having a support system personally, as well as if your organization is able to have a support system for you professionally, so that way you all can grow together over that first year of your transition.
That's super important about support, because the further that you go up the ladder, the lonelier it gets. So when you're a managing director, an artistic director, a director of production, your field of support, internal support of the organization, gets extraordinarily tiny.
Mhm.
So I think that support is very important. Hillary?
Yeah, this reminds me, there was a moment earlier this year. I am one of 2 non-white people on senior leadership at New York Theater Workshop. And there was a moment earlier this year where some harm was done in our community. And we wanted to go back to our staff and have a conversation to address that harm directly and to discuss next steps and take that moment with our teams. And so I was sitting in senior leadership and everyone was saying, great, go back to your department. Here's a conversation that you want to have. And I had a lot of problems with that. Thankfully, I have a great relationship with the New York Theater Workshop and a great relationship with my teams that I felt comfortable enough raising my hand and saying, hey, all you white people having that conversation with your white staffs is very different than me, an Asian person, having that conversation with my white staffs. So I need help. I need someone else to have that conversation with my staff because it is not going to go the same way that yours is. And so that is my, I guess, piece of feedback to folks in leadership positions who are in leadership with, managing, in leadership with and managing people who aren't white, is just recognizing when those moments of everyone being asked to do something impacts them differently. I think that same thing happens when we're talking about leading with grace in matters of anti-racism, that me having a discussion about anti-racism and white supremacy with my costume shop manager and TD, who are both twice as old as me and white men, is a different conversation. And so what are the ways that impacts me differently? What are the ways in which me constantly reminding folks about course correction and behavior correction is different than someone else who is white, who is a leader at our theater?
So for me, something I've been for a while now trying to figure out, as someone who's still an assistant, how does that look like when my the production manager I work for is a white man, and something that I've been kind of really carefully crafting, and also because it's become clear in our relationship that the production manager I work for is also very dedicated to this. And so he goes on his own to educate himself and doesn't put any of that burden on me. So we crafted a relationship, and I've designed this in such a way that it's like very specific to even make sure that he's able to represent me well. If there's something that I need to take to him, this sounded weird when that big boss person said this, can I talk to you about this? This is why it sounds weird to me, looking at it from a different perspective. And so I've sort of crafted a support system in that I go to him, I'm able to go to him, and also I'm able to be very real with him on hey, this is where X, Y, and Z is really weird now that we're chatting just you and I here. And not everyone's able to do that. I recognize that, because that's full stop. I'm gonna full stop there, because not everyone's able to do that. But I think for folks who report to other people on the day-to-day basis on their jobs, that has proven to be, to me, to really helped me into crafting like a relationship that is able to not fully understand because he's still a white man, but like is able to kind of be there with me, has proven to me to be really useful. Said that really weirdly. I apologize, but
No, that's not good.
I have a feeling Stewart and I might be about to say the same thing.
Do you?
But if not,
Do you?
maybe. I wanted to, yes, and Hillary and Itzel, the thing I've said in several rooms, and I know Stewart has said in several rooms, and other folks might have said, when we're talking about this idea of support, right? I often tell people in these kind of conversations, I want accomplices, I don't want an ally. I want somebody who's going to jump in and stand shoulder to shoulder with me, right? And I want that person to be my white colleague, right? Because as Hillary so accurately pontificated, it coming from this Black body to a staff that's mostly white, then when it's coming from another white body to a staff that's mostly white, lands differently. 10 times out of 10, it always does. And so I don't want someone who's got the flowery words, who's going to put it on social media and say, Leigh, I stand with you. But when we're in that meeting, you don't say anything, but then you come up to me after the fact and be like, oh, that was so messed up what they did. I really felt bad for you. Like I'm not here for that. Like that's not the time to be quote unquote team Leigh, right? Like I need you in that meeting in the mud. I need you to be an accomplice to this work. And if you're not going to be an accomplice, cool. I just know where we stand at that point, right? I know that I can't count on you in the thick of the things. And so, if you take nothing else from this as you're integrating and talking with your white colleagues, or if you are that white colleague, be an accomplice. Don't be an ally. Get in the mud and wrestle with these things with your colleagues of color, and don't let them have to carry that burden alone.
As my kids would say, it just hits different. I will be really mindful of time. We have about 8 minutes left in this, so I'm going to do a quick round robin and ask you all what is currently bringing you joy. So, Larry, I'm going to start with you.
That is no shock to anyone. I have not recently, but my family has recently welcomed a 4-month-old baby boy who brings me joy every day when he's not crying in the middle of the night. But that is always good.
Yes, please tell Dee I said hello, and I'm thankful that she's your better half. Hillary?
I'm thankful that I have crew working in the theater today. Trying to get the theater ready to invite audiences back in the fall, and it's just lovely to have people here, and doubly lovely because when our carpenter picked up the truck this morning, he also picked up donuts, and so we've been enjoying those all day.
Amazing. Itzel?
What I used to like de-stress for sure is sometimes I just need to turn on a K-drama and just let that flow.
Yes. And for me, number one, I own a website called productionondeck.com, and today I incorporated it. So I am now a consulting, and I am removing headhunting from my vernacular and going to talent acquisition. So I am doing that, and I am also the production manager for Disney's 50th anniversary. So I've gone from one of the smallest projects at Disney to the crown jewel project for Disney. So I'm super excited about that. We have a few minutes for questions. If anyone wants to raise their hand, yes, Black Excellence is for real. Any questions from our room? Just use that raise hand feature, please, if you have anything. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here and fill space. Well, I'm going to fill space for a minute then. Kind of going back into the importance of things. One, I think I'm going to kind of go on with what Larry was talking about, and that's onboarding. I think it's super, super important. It's one of the things when I left from the Guthrie and came to Disney, that I sat down with my future director of production, and said, you have to make sure that I succeed at this job. I'm an outsider coming in. I'm a person of color coming in. They haven't hired an outsider for a production management role in over a decade with this company. So my success will be your success. And obviously I want to succeed. And I liken it a lot to, remember when you like won a goldfish, or you went and got a goldfish from a pet store, you kept it in that bag of water from its previous environment, and then you take it and you put it in a new environment, but you don't immediately just dump the fish in because it will die in the new environment. So what you did is you kind of put it in, you let it acclimate temperature wise, and then you let the fish into the organization. And that's what Disney did with me, is they kind of let me sit in the water for a little bit, acclimate, and then they let me into the wild. Kate.
Hello. I've really loved this entire conversation. So just thank you for all of your wonderful knowledge. I was wondering, as production people, like, how do you feel about like hierarchical power structures slash how are like your theaters like dismantling that, and like, or are they dismantling that, or like do you even think it should be dismantled, or like just hearing your thoughts on that.
I know at Disney I'm not dismantling my power structure anytime soon. As a for-profit organization, we are very clear about our mission, and it's making money.
I only caught part of Eric Liu's keynote speech this morning, but I'm gonna turn it back to the way that he talked about power, that like all of us have power, and violence, he didn't say this, but like violence is when we refuse to acknowledge our power, right? And so I don't think that we're going to actually dismantle the hierarchy, right? Because there's a lot of benefits to structural hierarchy. There's efficiency, there's productivity, there's ease of decision making, all of that stuff I love. But the question is, how do I acknowledge my power and the power of those around me and uphold that hierarchy without silencing, right? Like silence is not a tool that I want to be using in order to maintain my power. And I think that's where we really start to struggle with hierarchy and bureaucracy and the institution, right? So what are the ways that I can acknowledge and hold and really live in my power without using silence as a tool?
That's so great. I saw a TikTok the other day that talked about how damaging the term being humble is, and that you're actually asking yourself to lessen yourself, to go, I'm really great, but don't be too great. And how it's different from thinking yourself as being great is different than thinking you're better than an individual. It's like, be great and enjoy your greatness. We are all great on this panel.
I like that. Be great. I would say for me, I am currently at an institution where our leader is a Black woman, and the first Black woman at a lower institution, right? And so, currently, right, I am not in the business of dismantling that power structure, because for the first time we've given that power to a Black person, but a Black woman who shows up in this body, to shape the American theater and our organization in the direction in which I want it to go, right? And so what I'm actually in the business of currently is, how do I support so that she is allowed the same leeway and leverage and all the things that came when a white man was in that position in leading this theater. What I thought Hillary said was really brilliant. I don't want to be silent to folks. I don't want to be gatekeeping. I want to make sure people have access to us and are able to gain opportunities by working with us, and we are doing that work. But I am currently on the train of making sure that this leader who shows up as this Black woman can have all of the rights and privileges as a white man in that position. So
I think for me, so what's interesting, as I am the one who sits on the assistant level and looking at it on the other way. So there's a couple of things. So like, just like even historically at the public, we went through like a huge furlough process, and a production department that was like 50 people became 12 people. And so I was one of two persons who didn't identify as white, like entirely. And what I found, one, that was really hard, just to say it out loud. Two, it made me think a lot about your question, Kate, on the other way of like, okay, I'm in this room full of white people who have been thinking about one thing this way for tens of years. and I'm here and I can see that I have a different idea and a different thought than how they've always thought about how to do this. I struggled with how to contribute to that, knowing where I was in the hierarchy. Honestly, I still struggle with this, but the thing I've come to terms and to realize about myself is that, like, okay, I can see that, like, I am able to contribute, like, honestly, sometimes, like, different ideas, because sometimes people would just be like, yes, and like, yes, the same idea, yes, the same idea. And then I'm like, I'm thinking critically about, like, what is the problem is being presented, or the thing is being presented about the production. And I'm like, oh, I actually have a different idea entirely. So how do I like, I'm not answering your question, Kate. I'm just saying that this is, like, a thing I struggle with, because sometimes I like don't know how to do that, because these people have held this position for so long, or because these people have so much power over me, So.
My stage management alarm bells are going off because I saw it hit 6 o'clock, and I'm like, I'm going, Shauna, I'm going. We're gonna get there. So I want to thank our panel and thank everybody for joining us. And I'll turn it back over to Shauna to close us out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. Wow. What a fantastic session. The only thing I'm going to say, number one, big gratitude for being here today, spending your time with us here at the conference. I also dropped in the chat a little form that you can fill out to tell us about this session. And we would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions, I'll stay on here for just a brief moment. But with that, thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Take good care of yourselves and each other. We'll
Thanks,
see you
everybody.
soon.